Hey, how's it going, everybody, and welcome back into the SFS channel. My name is Gavin, and today we're going to be doing another Dynasty Rookie Mock Draft for the 2022 season, and very similarly to the previous Dynasty Rookie Mock Draft I did, that was quite a few weeks ago now. I'm going to start pumping these out with a lot more regularity here. I'm going to be making all of the selections in today's mock draft, so I'm going to be walking through the board today. If I held each one of these picks, which player would I be selecting with the remaining players left on the board? For future episodes, however, if you would like to participate in them, that is going to be an option and something I would absolutely love to do here on the channel. So, in the description of today's and every episode here on the SFS channel, there's an invite link to our community Discord server. If you want to jump in there, you can join the discussion, chat fantasy football, dynasty, NFL news, whatever's going on. Jump in that group chat and you can chat with myself and other members of the SFS community. That's one location where I'll be posting the invite link to Sleeper, Dynasty Rookie Mock Drafts that I'll be doing here for the rest of this offseason as we approach the NFL Draft this summer, having free agency still being an ongoing process, and all that great stuff. I'll be doing some redraft stuff on there as well. So today I'll be breaking down the first round of a half PPR 1 QB league, the first 12 picks. Again, the first round of that draft. Let's not waste any more time. If you're new around here, drop down, click that subscribe button, and turn the bell on. Also, give today's episode a like before we get started, and let's get into the first pick. Alrighty, here we go. So we're technically a couple of weeks removed from the NFL Scouting Combine, but this is my first time on the SFS channel here on YouTube that I've updated my rankings for you all to give you kind of a heads up on where my head is at here as we get into, we're about a week away from the start of April, and obviously that will mark the 4-week point up until the NFL draft. So Garrett Wilson at this point in time is the player I would draft first overall in a rookie mock draft. Now, there can be some variance depending on who you ask. You've got Breece Hall out there, who is some players' number one guy on the board. You've also got Treylon Burks. But for me, I think Garrett Wilson is a fantastic slam dunk at the wide receiver position, someone that's going to give you some long-term upside and elite level potential at the next level. To me, you've got a player here who reminds me a little bit of the player Davante Adams is in the National Football League as a college prospect. And if you know Davante Adams, if you know his story, he was nothing close in college or even his first 2 or even 3 seasons in the NFL compared to the player he is now. But I see a lot of the body control, the movement ability, the route running, some of the savvy moves from Garrett Wilson that you see from some of the best route runners in the game today. And something fantastic that Garrett Wilson walks into the National Football League with that Davante Adams didn't necessarily have is elite level athleticism in terms of his 40 testing time. 4.38 speed was one of the most impressive markers for that top level wide receiver group. And I think that Garrett Wilson is absolutely going to put all the pieces together at the next level. Now, the main question for me remains, where's Garrett Wilson going to land? And technically for the wide receiver position, some would argue that you have an elongated shelf life here where you can kind of bank on the fact that eventually a situation that's favorable will play out here. Running backs is a little bit different with that shorter shelf life and that more immediate urgency for them to hit. But still, Garrett Wilson's landing spot will be an impactful thing for me if he lands with one of the game's top quarterbacks. Obviously, that is a huge plus for his fantasy profile and outlook, but there is some concern. You've got teams at the top of the board like the Washington Commanders. Not sure how you feel about Carson Wentz, but personally, I don't see him as the most consistent player. Again, though, I don't expect Washington to be tied to them or to Carson Wentz for too long of a time frame here. Atlanta, obviously, immediately would be a disaster. I would not want any part of Marcus Mariota. However, again, those situations will be constantly evolving, so even if he does go to one of those lesser teams, a situation that has poor quarterback play or less than optimal QB play, that'll affect him in the short term, but long term, Garrett Wilson is still my top prospect at this position in the draft class, and I feel really, really good about what he brings to the next level. At number 2, I'm sticking wide receiver here. I love Breece Hall. I know a lot of players out there think he could have significant day 1 dynasty impact. I'm in that camp as well, but I also really, really like Treylon Burks in the frame he brings, the physicality, the athleticism. Now, The NFL Combine wasn't exactly his most shining moment. I think he ran a little bit slower than maybe he hoped to, and I think that a lot of the Dynasty community that was getting on the Treylon Burks number 1 overall hype train was maybe a little bit disappointed to see 4.55 40-yard dash. That's definitely not terrible. You could definitely do worse than that, especially a 6'3", 220-pound wide receiver who has exceptional body control. But again, we all fantasized about having Treylon Burks running, low 4.4 speed and obviously giving you elite level burst for this size at the next level. But what is encouraging is obviously, again, the skill set. And still, running a 4.55 at this size is quite the feat as it is. He talked about the Combine, how he kind of wants to mirror his game after Deebo Samuel. That was something that I thought was kind of a good comp. I think that Deebo Samuel is kind of a one-of-one player in terms of what he brings to the table, but Treylon Burks is certainly someone who has the size, frame, and physical features that can bring that level of impact to obviously the NFL organization he goes to, because if you look at his tape from Arkansas, he's got a lot of work on film with him catching passes at the line of scrimmage, little bubble route, swing patterns, and taking those plays for an extended amount of yardage after the catch, which again is a very, very crucial thing. You want to see players that are productive after the catch point, and with his size and his athleticism, again, for a player of his stature, he does have good body control, actually quite exceptional body control for that size that he brings to the table. Obviously, the larger you get, the harder it is to control your movement. So Treylon Burks is someone who I look to as, again, another long-term fantastic dynasty option and someone who has really, really high upside at that wide receiver position. Now we get to Breece Hall here, a little bit lower on him than most. Obviously, players are going to prioritize the running back position because of that positional scarcity. That's very warranted. I'm totally on that boat as well. For me, it's going to play and come down to, now these rankings are, again, constantly changing as we get new information, as I continue to watch even more tape, rewatch tape. I really like to study these players' games and exactly how they can contribute to a team. I'll be matching up their skill sets with obviously all the landing spots they have after that NFL draft date. But I'm hoping that Breece Hall can get some second-round draft capital. I would be shocked if he fell to the third round. I do expect him to be the first running back taken off the board. So again, I do anticipate that we can check off that box for the draft capital category for him in this draft class. And the skill set is phenomenal. He ran a faster 40-yard dash than I had anticipated. I think that his play speed on tape didn't necessarily flash to me that he was going to be one of the top 40-yard dash runners at the Combine. Certainly of the highly regarded running backs, he's at the top of that class, even edged out Kenneth Walker by a little bit. So Breece Hall, good pass catcher as well. Patient runner, can use his size a little bit in his favor, and has the workhorse build you're looking for, going about 6'1", 220. So Breece Hall, again, my number 1 running back in this class. Again, the draft capital as well will play a huge part in this, as it will for everyone, in particular at the running back position, and especially for these guys we're looking to take off the board early in our dynasty drafts. Landing spot in situation is going to be a big thing as well. Offensive line, quarterback play, all that good stuff. Overall offensive potential output there. Excuse me. Drake London at the number 4 spot. This is a player that I have some concerns about his usage. I think that he has to go to a situation where you have a quarterback who's willing to toss up a lot of 50-50 balls. He's a better route runner than I initially gave him credit for. I will concede that here. However, I do think that, again, being someone who's not necessarily going to be the most shifty guy out in space, he does have a very clear way to use him, and we have to hope that he finds a situation where he can thrive in that role. In my NFL mock drafts that I've been doing here recently, I've mocked him a lot to the Washington Commanders. Pairing him with Carson Wentz, a quarterback, I think that he can, play very well with a guy who's had success and good track records with larger, big body wide receivers. Your Alshon Jeffries and Michael Pittmans of the world. Pittman obviously being a former USC product as well. So there's a lot of chance to be an NFL red zone monster and touchdown magnet with that 6'5" frame that he has. Again, he is a little bit more shifty and elusive out in space than I gave him credit for at first, as well as his routes are pretty crisp as well. On tape, the separation isn't overly fantastic. It's not something I'd grade at an elite level like I would a Garrett Wilson or some other names in the wide receiver crop for this season. But part of that can be attributed to poor quarterback play, having to wait for balls to catch up to him downfield. and obviously track those things. If they're not the most accurate passes in the world, that's going to affect things a bit. But again, that separation is not something that is necessarily on the same level as other players, but he does bring a very, very unique skill set to the table, and that is that massive size and wingspan. At number 5, Kenneth Walker here at, this is the biggest fluctuating position for me is going to be that of the running back group. It's all going to come down to that draft capital. That's the biggest number one thing outside of skill set that you bring to the table for dynasty players here, and you're pretty much going to see just about a linear pattern in the order that the running backs come off the table in the NFL draft. That's usually how it's going to be the case in our dynasty mock drafts. And even looking ahead to redraft leagues, it's quite similar there as well. So whatever players, teams, NFL teams that is, choose to invest into first, those are going to be the players we invest into first, as obviously we want players on our team that the NFL teams have a strong tie to and are wanting to get on the field early and often. I love Kenneth Walker's skill set. I've talked about how he shows up biggest in the toughest of games. I go back to that Michigan example over and over again of him taking over that contest and having a huge upset during this season. His explosiveness in the open field is something that also pops to me. Not an elite pass catcher. I'd say he's average at best in the receiving game, but he is someone who's competent enough to get the job done in that facet of things. But again, he is that one-cut home run hitter and a little bit smaller than Breece Hall at my number 1 running back position. Jameson Williams is who I'd take at number 6 here. Now, he does fall one spot shy of Kenneth Walker. I would go back and forth between these two players. And the one thing that at this point in time is keeping Williams behind Kenneth Walker is the ACL injury. Now, recovering from that is going to be something that is largely factored into his day one output and potential here. It might take him a bit longer to get on the field, develop rapport with his quarterback, and move his way up the depth chart. Now, I do expect that he will go in late stages of round 1, so obviously getting fantastic draft capital there, or early in the second round. If that is the case, he will be put on the field by his coaching staff, given opportunities to succeed. And this is a player that gives you absolutely fantastic ability and upside downfield. One of the best playmakers in the country this year, had a whopping 1,500-plus yard season here. And he averaged 9.3 yards after the catch per reception. So his yak was 9.3 yards per catch. That is ridiculous, and that's how you rack up those yards extremely quickly. Again, the acceleration, the burst, the explosiveness is all fantastic. You would like to see his underneath game get developed a little bit more and maybe have him put on some weight at the next level so that press coverage isn't a huge issue for him. Kind of a similar thing we talked about with Devontae Smith last season, but to a much, much, much larger extent. Nonetheless, though, I think that Jameson Williams has star potential if paired with a big arm quarterback. But again, as we touched on, quarterback situations, especially this offseason, are constantly changing. So not something to, completely push all of your chips to the center of the table for in that one facet of things there. Chris Olave is a close secondary player to Jameson Williams. Not necessarily the best phrasing by me there, but comes up as a close second if you were to compare these two in a bubble. In my personal opinion, I have Chris Olave as my number 7 overall player. So if I had the number 7 draft pick, this is where I'd be taking Chris Olave off the board. I really like his smooth route running. Another fantastic deep threat. At the next level, you could see him fall to the number 22 pick, potentially land Aaron Rodgers. The Packers are looking to address that number 1 wide receiver position immediately after trading Devontae Adams away to the Las Vegas Raiders. That's a team to keep your eye out for. Also, the Arizona Cardinals, potentially tying him with Kyler Murray, who's lost a couple of wide receiver options, and Christian Kirk and A.J. Green, who's still out there. Could potentially get some really, really good quarterback play right off the bat. So, again, really underrated as an underneath route runner. The routes are very smooth, very crisp. Actually, one of his nicknames is Mr. Smooth, and he's going to be creating massive separation downfield. That's what he did at all 4 of his eligible seasons at Ohio State, and I'm very confident that he will translate to the next level. There's a significant community of Chris Olave doubters and haters out there, but I expect that he will do just fine at the next level and be a very productive option. Not quite as smooth in his overall game in elite of a route runner as a Garrett Wilson, but again, someone I really, really like. George Pickens is my number 8 player here. Now, this is a bit of a more raw prospect. There are 2, I would say, very extreme camps out there in the dynasty community for George Pickens. One that is overly bullish in my estimation in terms of George Pickens, overrating him a significant amount. And then there's the group of players that absolutely hate what George Pickens, brings to the table, and they're not fans whatsoever. I'm somewhat in between. I see the upside. It's phenomenal. 6'3", 200 pounds, can absolutely fly down the field. Was dang close to having a massive breakout freshman season at Georgia. And then the quarterback play really stifled his production. It was very underwhelming, obviously, in terms of what it could have been. Not to say that he was a unworthy player of, having his name tossed around in the discussion as a late first round, early second round pick this year. Not at all what I'm saying. But what I am trying to point out here is that it looked like the production and the impact at the college level was going to be insane early, and then obviously carry that out through the rest of your college football career. That wasn't necessarily how things played out. He kind of fizzled out in terms of having an upward projection and ascension in his production in the yardage category each season. So I love the raw athletic ability here. He did say, this is just players talking, but I love to hear their aspirations. What type of player do you want to be? We talked about Treylon Burks, how he wants to be a Deebo Samuel-like player, runs a slightly slower 40-yard dash. Deebo's at 4.48 and Burks was at 4.55. George Pickens talked about wanting to play and mold his game after Davante Adams. Obviously, an insanely polished receiver, someone who gets it done at all three levels of the defense, short, intermediate, and deep passing game, and has an absolute lethal arsenal of releases, and obviously body control and maneuvers to separate from defensive players. So if George Pickens wants to mold his game after Davante Adams, be my guest, because with those athletic, unteachable things, you can have a very, very high ceiling. But then there's the other camp, argues that Pickens is someone who is raw and underdeveloped prospect. His underneath and intermediate game is lacking right now. The tape we have at the moment is certainly not, I wouldn't say it's damning evidence against George Pickens, but it's not something that gives you an overly large amount of comfortability with that or those two phases of his game. So things to improve upon at the next level. But again, if he has the right leadership, wide receiver coaching staff, or maybe he's even just doing work behind the scenes simply, I think that the sky's the limit for Pickens here. Isaiah Spiller falls down to my number 9 spot. Now, this is my number 3 running back on the board. Should still be considered a very valuable player, but I'll put that in quotations there because I think that I have a lot of concerns and a lot of hesitations with Isaiah Spiller. I think he's a really nice receiving player. I like his build, 6'1", 200-plus pounds. 215, I think, is about what he goes. But my overall concern is I don't see any elite traits or elite running back potential. Now, he does have, again, nice fantasy skills and things that he brings to the table that can make him a productive player. Like I said, a very nice pass catching back. One of my more immediate comps for him, was Matt Forte of the Chicago Bears, a larger receiving back for that team for a number of years. But as a rusher, I don't see too much explosiveness, too much pop in the open field. Not an overly physical player for being a larger guy. He's decently elusive, but not someone that I would say is a complete ankle breaker and is going to steal your soul in the open field. So there's some nice things to work with here, but overall I don't see him being someone who you would think about as an RB1 in a given season unless he's catching an insane volume of passes. And that's, at the end of the day, what kind of builds into my capped ceiling assessment for an Isaiah Spiller. We don't really know what his draft capital is going to be. Maybe late second round, early third, just a guess here. Who knows at that point? The farther you get into the draft, the more difficult it is to project landing spots and draft capital investment. But Spiller is someone I certainly have my reservations for. That's kind of the word I was searching for during that whole take there, is that at the end of the day, I like some of the stuff he brings to the table, but I'm going to pump the brakes on having him as my RB2 in this class, or even someone I would argue that comes in and is a slam dunk to be productive day one. Skyy Moore, the wide receiver out of Western Michigan, the pride of the Broncos, is my number 10 pick here. If I were, selecting from this position, again, this is technically a mock draft. You can look at it as more of a rankings list, whatever the case might be. If I was making the picks, this is how I would select the board here, with each player consecutively gone after the next. Again, if you want to join future Dynasty Rookie Mock Drafts, we can have a collaborative effort here on the SFS channel. Join that community Discord server, and I'll be sending those links out. I will @ everyone when I'm planning, maybe 15 to 30 minutes ahead of time, get as many people in there as possible, and then have, sleeper do the rest if we don't fill up that lobby. But if we could fill up that lobby, that'd be great. So share this video with your friends, anyone you play Dynasty with, and we can all get better together this offseason. So Skyy Moore, back to one of my favorite and most under the radar prospects. Within 2 or 3 plays of me cutting on the tape of Skyy Moore, I was completely blown away. It was a receiver I hadn't heard much chatter about during the standard college football season. And then after things were kind of winded down, after the fantasy football season had kind of come to a close, and I began breaking down film, sifting through prospect names, I was completely obsessed with what I saw here from Skyy Moore. Without even knowing he was going to run a 4.41 40-yard dash to the NFL Combine, having much better athletic measurables than I expected, just seeing how he gets in and out of his breaks, his ability to be an incredibly productive, what I would consider slot receiver build at the next level. Now he does go about 5'10", so he could play outside on occasion. He is, well, I'll get to that in a second, but he's a player who can line up outside, beat defensive backs deep, obviously has the speed to get behind players and stretch the field vertically, but he also has the wiggle and the shift to be what I could consider a future quarterback's best friend, as a guy that can sit down underneath, find the hole in the zone coverage, find the soft spot, and just tear zone defense apart. I mean, it's just an added bonus for me. I really like Skyy Moore, and I had him pegged lower on my list initially because I didn't expect him to run so dang fast. Again, 4.41 was his 40-yard dash. Who knows where his draft capital will be at? I've seen everything from having Skyy Moore in the late first to some having him fall all the way down in the 3rd round because he doesn't have some of the size that other guys in this list have. A lot of these wide receivers in this draft class are 5'11" at minimum, or even pushing the meter to be 6 foot, 6'1", or even in some cases 6'2", 6'3". So he's a smaller receiver in this class. That's why I think he can be a very good PPR slot receiver. But again, that route tree does not stop and is not limited to the short and intermediate passing game. This guy can get vertical, get deep, and stretch the seams of defenses, which I think is going to be a huge asset to have at the next level. Could not say enough about what I like in Skyy Moore. If you're picking in the late end of the 1st round this year, that could potentially be one of the steals of the draft and keep a player who was right on the cusp of winning a championship, or potentially even won a championship, or just acquired the 110 draft pick. A really, really nice piece to continue adding to their puzzle. David Bell is someone who's fallen down my rankings a little bit here at the number 11 position. Now, kind of, you've seen some guys thrive, see their draft stock rise in value since the NFL Scouting Combine. David Bell's 40-yard dash has certainly, I would say, caused his stock to dip a little bit. 4.65 40-yard dash is not something to get necessarily overly excited about. Now, you can talk about players like, again, going back to a Devontae Adams, who came into the National Football League running a similar time and not necessarily flashing elite athletic potential in that moment, but then developing their games. I would certainly argue that Devontae Adams is a more explosive player and a more elite athlete today than he was back in 2014 when he was a rookie for the Green Bay Packers. So David Bell's got a chance here. Cooper Kupp, another guy that ran, I think, a 4.62 40-yard dash, if I can remember that off the top of my head. Obviously, 2 very, very different players. You've got, more of an outside build with Bell and more of a slot guy, and Cooper Kupp, a bigger slot player, but a slot athlete nonetheless. Bell is someone who has really nice traits and really nice intangibles, though. A polished, complete player, runs really crisp routes. He's good after the catch. Now, his separation numbers are not all that fantastic. I believe it was 44% of his single coverage snaps he was able to separate from. So definitely not an elite level marker, but still a player whose tape impresses me. And this is a player who was also able to produce very, very well in his freshman season at Purdue, and in the absence of Rondale Moore due to injury, was able to really step up to the plate and have a dang good season. So Bell, again, is another one of those guys that has really wide-ranging draft stock estimations in terms of where he's going to go. At 6'2", 205, he's got decent size, not necessarily a guy you expect to be physically imposing, but he could really develop into a nice player if he continues to step forward as an athlete and then continues to build his game, which, again, as I said, is very polished and very refined for a younger player. Something I've compared him to is kind of a poor man's Rashad Bateman, who I think has a really, really nice ceiling Obviously, Lamar Jackson is going to continue to develop as a passer this season. And I think the more that he starts to rack up those injuries, is getting off the point a little bit here. But as Lamar's rushing kind of eats into his health here, I think he's going to continue to rely on that passing game, which I thought was actually, aside from the picks and the turnovers he had, I was impressed with his pushing the ball downfield. So I'm really excited to see that Ravens offense next season. But David Bell, nonetheless, a player who I have seen similarities to in Rashad Bateman, but I would say Bateman is a better athlete. And then number 12 here, finally, if I had the last pick in the first round, I would select Malik Willis. Now, there's a wide variety of players, that could go at this 112 spot. And I would certainly say it's up to personal preference and opinion, depending on how you have your running backs ranked. You could have Brian Robinson out of Alabama here. You could have Rachaad White out of Arizona State here. Again, depending on your preference, I have Robinson slightly ahead of Rachaad White, but again, those are my rankings. I'm sure that you all watching this video have your own assessments of players, or you could go dabble back in the wide receiver group. Some guys really like Justin Ross out of Clemson. I'm not one of those people who is very high on him, but you've got the athleticism of a Jahan Dotson still out there, among other names. So Malik Willis is the pick for me, though, at number 12. I think if anyone in this draft class has the chance to be a special player in the fantasy world at the quarterback position, it would be Malik. You've got the most athleticism here, the ability to play, make, and scramble, and that is exactly what I think he is. I think he's more of Russell Wilson than he is of Lamar Jackson. Not saying he's going to be either of those two players, but I see more scrambling turning into playmaking than I see tucking the football and rushing, and that's where I get that closer comp to a Russell Wilson than a Lamar Jackson, whereas I think that Lamar would certainly be someone who, despite my long-term expectations that I kind of just laid out there a second ago, at this point in time, what we've seen most recently is that he is certainly very, very willing, while he still will play make and throw the football downfield after scrambling. He'll tuck that sucker down and he'll take off for 25. I think Malik Willis will run every once in a while, but he's more so keeping his eyes downfield and looking to make that splash play with his arm. And that is exactly what I think he will do. I don't think he's going to be a cutting-edge rushing threat at the next level as a fantasy quarterback. I do think that he certainly will add value in that fashion. Even more so a Jalen Hurts, if you want to go that far. Jalen's someone who was a very productive rushing threat this season. And again, I'm not trying to throw shade at Malik Willis' rushing ability at all, because I think it's certainly there. I just expect him to use his arm more than we've seen some of the previous quarterbacks capable of tucking the football down and running. So I would love to see him go to Seattle, pair him up with a Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf. It just makes sense. It feels perfect to kind of replace Russell Wilson with a player who has some similarities to his game, but as the Seattle Seahawks are wiping every last piece of the last decade of success they've had off their roster, we'll see if they go in a different direction. The Falcons, obviously, at the number 8 pick, just picked up Marcus Mariota. You could make some similarities between their mobility as well. That would be a day one kind of a humbling moment to see Malik have to go in there and try and rally those troops, because that wide receiver core, in my opinion, is probably the worst in the NFL at this point in time. And you've got very big protection issues as well with the O-line. So getting into landing spots and stuff here and whatnot. But essentially, the thought process here is that I think Malik has the best chance to walk in day one, or not even day one, but just long-term, to give you the best QB upside in this class. I think he's got more upside than Matt Corral, than your Kenny Pickett's, your Sam Howells, and that's ultimately where we land here at the number 12 spot. So, again, one more time, if you haven't checked out the SFS Community Discord server and you want to join a future Dynasty Rookie Mock Draft, or a Dynasty Startup Mock Draft, or even a 2022 Redraft League Mock Draft, join that invite link in the description of today's episode. Leave today's video with a like before you head on out. And thank you guys so much for watching. I appreciate each and every single one of you guys that made it to this point in the video. Peace out.